My guest on the Rush Friday feature joins me for our 16th annual interview. He's a 10-year Major League veteran. Neil Walker, another year, another interview. Thanks for joining us once again.
Oh, always a pleasure, Joe. It's 16 years in the making. That's pretty incredible. I hope you're well and looking forward to 2021 being a lot better than 2020. Let's call it as it is.
Well, you've heard of Where's Waldo. Where's Neil right now?
Well, to be honest with you, when things started to get kind of not very good in western Pennsylvania in November, my family and I hightailed it to the mountains of Colorado where there's significantly less people and significantly less COVID. So we've been hunkered down here, my wife and 2 children, for pretty much the last 2 months. So it's been a little bit different of an off season, of course, but it's been one that we've enjoyed thoroughly as a family to this point.
Joining us on the Rush Friday feature, Neil Walker. Neil, how do you describe last season? You had COVID, a 60-game schedule, no fans. It just seems like it was unreal. You couldn't make that up, could you?
Yeah, it really was bizarre. I can remember the day in spring training. Obviously spent the year with the Phillies, and we had a spring training game in Port Charlotte against the Tampa Bay Rays, and there was probably about a week left in spring training, and we went down there, and I remember that games out in Arizona were starting to get canceled, and we were watching the TV before we were heading out for our spring training game, and we were like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And they were like, well, sounds like certain areas are getting hit worse with this coronavirus, and we played the game, and there were a couple meetings between the managers and the umpires, and we were like, what's going on? This is really weird. There was just a weird vibe, and when the game ended, they were like, hey, we got a meeting the next morning in the clubhouse. We're not going to practice. We're not going to have a game. Just everybody come in their street clothes. And I remember coming in and them saying, hey, we're going to be shut down for the time being. If you can get home, get home. And I remember just thinking my family was back in Pittsburgh. I remember saying, you know what, this doesn't feel like it's going to be a week-long thing. It feels like it's going to be long-term. And so I hightailed it as quickly as I could back to Pittsburgh to be with my family. And wouldn't you know it, 3.5 months later, we're still sitting there getting ready to head to Philadelphia to basically have a third of a season.
Were you constantly tested? How did that work out?
Yeah, so we were tested every other day. We had the spit test, and if for some reason you tested positive, which I believe we only had a couple guys test positive, but they ended up being false positives when the season had actually started. We had a couple guys between the shutdown of spring training and the new spring training in early July that caught the coronavirus, and they experienced tough symptoms and were able to recover pretty well. But yeah, I mean, when we went on the road, you pretty much were going from the hotel to the bus to the field, getting tested, eating your meals not in the clubhouse, having several different areas to change, wearing masks in the clubhouse even when you were getting treatment or going to the weight room or whatever. So it was something that we had to really get used to, and I felt that we actually did a really good job in our clubhouse because we didn't have any positive tests. And that was also at the beginning of the year when we played the Miami Marlins, and 19 of their players tested positive, and we were in fairly close contact, although we were outside with those guys days before a lot of them tested positive.
When you were playing with no fans around, you had to think back the time maybe in high school or in the lower minors where there was nobody around. And how odd was that with no fans?
Yeah, it definitely took some getting used to. I think that the first week or so where they were pumping crowd noise into the stadium and you weren't playing, I was kind of an extra guy, a bench guy, so I wasn't supposed to be in the dugout until later on in the game when I may have been called on. So when the game would start, myself and a couple other players, we would be sitting in the stands down the left field or right field lines outside of the clubhouse and not inside in the clubhouse. I mean, we were supposed to be in the stands out of the way. So it was just bizarre because somebody scored a run in the first 2, 3, 4 innings or hit a homer or something. You weren't really a part of that. You were you were down basically like a spectator. And, when the 5th inning rolled around or the 4th inning rolled around, you went back inside and kind of got ready like a normal bench player. But after the game started, it really wasn't that bad. But to get used to them pumping in the crowd noise and there really being just a quiet sense to the entire nature of the game this year was something that was really bizarre.
We are joined by Neil Walker on the Rush Friday feature. We've talked over the years. You were a 19-year-old kid when we did our initial interview. Now you're a, quote, seasoned veteran, and, baseball looks at anybody over 30 years of age as becoming ancient. How different is that currently at your age and looking back when you were younger and how baseball looks at it? It's a business, and they've sort of decided that being old is not the greatest thing in the world, is it?
Well, and I think that's something that these analytical minds and these guys that maybe haven't played the game from a significant standpoint at the major league level, they're looking less arbitrarily at players and more so as statistics and saying, hey, okay, well, it's just proven that guys over the age of 31, 32, whatever that number is for these guys making some of these decisions, they're not as valuable as maybe guys that haven't reached their peak at 26, 27, 28. And, as a player that's played kind of in both realms, because this philosophy has really kind of changed over the course of the past 5, 6, 7 years, there's a significant amount of value that comes with a player such as myself, really, but guys like me that have been around and played on winning teams, played on losing teams, played in good environments, played in bad environments. I mean, there's so many different levels to success and failure at the major league level that you can't just be a statistic. It just doesn't work. And there are organizations that live and die by that and have done well, and then there's organizations that have lived and died by that to this point that haven't done well. So, I think a happy balance and a happy medium between the whole analytical-minded personnel on a team and also the logical-mindedness of putting a team together combined probably is the best way to go. And like I said, I've seen kind of both sides of that. That's just where we are right now in the game of baseball. They're looking for young, cheap players to try to win championships. And, if you're over the age of 30, you're probably getting a one-year deal and hoping to get significant amount of playing time and helping a team win.
You're obviously aware of the fact that many fans have become disgusted with baseball with this whole idea of, and again, I'm not making fun of the Harvard grad or Ivy League grad who throws all these numbers in a computer, but you look at what happened in the World Series, you look at these decisions that are being made by, obviously not the manager, but doesn't Major League Baseball understand that fans want to see the raw emotion of a baseball game and decisions made, some gut decisions, which many times are more interesting?
Yeah, and, like you said, the disheartening side of the analytical world involved with baseball is seeing Blake Snell come out of a game and end up losing that game in the World Series and cost them basically a chance to get to Game 7 of the World Series. And, it's just one of those things where you hope that you have kind of all of your information in line before a game. I know these guys go through all the different scenarios that could pop up over the course of a game. Who's healthy, who's thrown a lot, who hasn't thrown a lot, what position players are hot, that type of thing. But at the end of the day, the eye test a lot of time wins in baseball, especially in the dog days, especially in the playoffs. I've been fortunate enough to kind of live in both worlds and see both sides of it, and I do believe there's a happy medium cut from the old school mode where the eye test is more important to me than the actual numbers, and I'm not somebody that sits back and really delves into the numbers and so on and so forth. I want to look at video day to day of who we're playing on that particular day and kind of prepare on a day-to-day basis as opposed to the fly ball era type of player or the spin rate type of pitcher mentality. My philosophy is go in and prepare yourself and grind and give yourself the best chance on a daily basis and see what happens, as opposed to focusing on how high it can hit the baseball off of a pitcher or wondering how many spin rates a pitcher has to his fastball.
We are joined by Neil Walker in the Rush Friday feature. Neil, you had something that never happened to you before. You were released by the Phillies because obviously every player knows that eventually the end has to come. And what was that feeling like?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously really disheartening. Something that kind of was not easy for me this year was the fact that the National League went to American League rules. And my goal before last season was to join a team that had a good core group of players and had a good chance of making a run at the playoffs and going deep, but to be, an integral part of that team as a bench piece, as somebody that could play multiple positions, come off the bench late in the game and put good at-bats together, whether it's pinch hit for a pitcher the first or second time around or for a particular player, a position player. And once those rules went from National League to American League, I thought to myself, oh, this isn't good. And, that basically ended up being part of the reason why I ended up getting DFA'd was because, I was much more expendable on an American League team as I was on a National League team. So certainly, like I said, disheartening. And luckily it wasn't super early in the season. It was only with, I think, 10 to 14 days left in the season. So, and, the Phillies ended up not making the playoffs, which I wasn't happy about. But certainly if I was going to be a part of the team, you want that opportunity to play in the playoffs. So it was definitely weird. It was definitely one of these things that you don't ever really prepare for, but at the same time, given all the circumstances this year and just kind of how things have gone, I kind of looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, this is 2020. This is the kind of stuff that happened. But I guess in a nutshell, the fact that American League rules kind of went into the National League game really affected players like myself this past year.
Some final moments with Neil Walker on the Rush Friday feature. Well, let's talk about two positive things. Number one, you became a 10-year player, and not just from the monetary point of view, but you've got to feel great because I looked up the stats, and only 23% of all Major League players achieve 10 years in the majors. So that's certainly a great accomplishment. You had that, but let's go to the biggest thing about last year. Neil Walker, ERA of 0.00. Your dad, who was a pitcher, he wasn't even close to that. How about telling us about that day, and did anybody tell you they were thinking of having you pitch?
Well, it's funny. We were playing the Baltimore Orioles in Philadelphia, and our bullpen had been pretty taxed, and we had had 2 or 3 games in a row where our starting pitchers had only gone 3-4 innings at the most, and that particular series, Baltimore had just been banging the ball around. They just were killing our guys. The first game of the series, actually, the manager came down about the 8th inning, and I hadn't gotten the game yet. I was sitting on the bench that game. He said, "Hey, there was 2 of us sitting there, two guys that haven't got in," and he said, "Hey, have either of you pitched before?" And and we both said no. And I said, "Hey, listen, I'm happy to go out there. I really don't mind, but just give me a heads up so I can go inside and get a few tosses in." Well, that particular game, 2 days before I actually went in the game, I didn't end up going in, obviously. And 2 days later, the score got out of hand, and our pitchers were taxed, and he looked at me in the 8th inning. I think it was the 8th or 7th or 8th inning. He said, "Hey, do you mind going in?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Well, I walked the first guy, and I got the next 2 guys to pop up, got out of the inning, and I think I topped out at about 81, threw a couple sliders, woke up the next day and couldn't feel my right shoulder, my left butt cheek from the plant leg and the firing shoulder. But at the same time, I had a 0.00 ERA for my career, and I told the manager, I said, "I'm done." I said, "I don't want anything to do with getting back on that mound." And the first call that I made was my father after the game, and I said, "I don't know how you have a 3-something ERA in your career. It's really not that difficult to get big league hitters out. You just throw the ball at the top of the zone, let them hit pop-ups, and get out of the inning."
Now, I noticed when you were coming off the mound, a little grin on your face. What were you saying? Like, that's not so tough, right?
No, I was actually thinking to myself, oh, man, that was not as fun as I potentially thought it could be, because it was one of those things where you're watching for so long and you forget what pitching is like, and you're seeing guys not be able to throw the ball to the plate, and then you get out on the mound 60 feet, 6 inches away, and you're like, wow, this is not as easy as you think, especially when you try to throw a little harder or throw a slider or throw something like that. So I just was happy to not have to go back out there anymore. That was probably exactly what the grin was telling you.
Well, one of the things we do every year is I ask you to relate a funny or bizarre story about something during your time in baseball. And when I notified you a couple of weeks ago, you said it's going to be tough. It's 16 years now, but I know you can come through. You're a 10-year Major League veteran. You have an ERA of 0.00. You can do it, Neil. Go ahead.
I do. I went deep in the vault for you, Joe, and I remembered that several years back, I had a teammate that we were late in September and we were getting close to the playoffs, and we were coming into an important series. I think we had 2 series left, and we had to win like 3 out of the last 6 games to get into the playoffs. And I had a teammate that we were on the road, and we went into the stadium, and they put the lineup up, and you're looking around, and batting practice comes around, and you're like, hey, what's his name? And somebody was like, well, I don't think he's feeling very well. He said he was going to come late and just get himself ready and show and go, they call it. Basically, not take BP, not hit the cage, just get ready to go. And it just so happened this particular night, he didn't show up till about 6 o'clock for a 7 o'clock game because he had a little too much fun the night before, we came to find out. Nobody could find him. And he had slept till 5:30, woke up, took a shower, came to the ballpark, and this particular gentleman ended up going 4 for 5 that night with 3 RBIs, and it essentially helped us clinch a playoff spot. So one of those nights where you look around and you say, this can't possibly be happening, especially in a game with such ramifications, and you're so focused, and you have somebody that, not that he wasn't taking things seriously, but he just had a little too much fun the night before, and he shows up and gets himself 4 hits and basically helps you get to the playoffs. So baseball's a funny game. I don't operate in that realm, and a lot of guys don't, but that particular night, it worked for that particular gentleman. So that's probably one of the funnier stories I have, and certainly obviously don't want to give away any identities, but, those type of things don't happen very often in the sports world, but this particular night it did.
Well, Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle, I guess, are our best examples, right?
Right.
Neil, thanks for joining us once again. Now, look, next year will be number 17. Let me tell you right now, Darnell Coles, who I'll be interviewing next week, it'll be 29 years. So you've got to
Wow.
catch up to him eventually. So you can do that years from now when you're out of baseball. If you're ever out of baseball, you may be back pitching with a knuckleball or whatever, but we're going to try to see if we can catch up with Darnell.
Well, that's good company. Darnell's a good buddy of mine, and I really like him, so I'll work hard to try to catch up with him. But, maybe you can do every other year so I can catch up a little bit with him.
All right. Thanks a lot for joining us.
You got it. You got it.